Welcome to the 2024 Water Reuse Symposium. I'm Stacy Flax with Hach, and today we're going to be talking about the future of water reuse with Bart Weiss, President of WateReuse, and Patricia Sinicropi, Executive Director of Water Reuse. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you, Stacy. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. I would first like to find out a little bit more about this event. Being here, there's a ton of traffic, a lot of great innovations, conversations happening. But from your perspective, what do you think is the most exciting thing happening today?
Well, one of the most exciting things for me is that we have representatives from 40 states and about 25 countries. So we've expanded the messaging not only throughout the United States, but around the world.
Pat?
Well, what I'm excited about are all the meetings and side conversations that are taking place at the symposium. For example, yesterday we had state regulators from almost 25 states join us for a state regulatory summit where the states are getting together by themselves to share lessons learned, share their knowledge with each other about how to effectively develop regulations at the state level to support water recycling projects. I think that's an exciting piece of what we're doing here. So many others. We had a great keynote this morning, Pete McBride talking about the Colorado River. So lots of exciting stuff.
Nice. You've kind of begun to answer my very first question, which is, can you provide a brief overview for the audience that maybe isn't quite as familiar with water reuse as an industry, as to what's happening? What are the innovations and the most exciting things that you see maybe on the horizon?
I'll go a step backwards and say that water reuse began with purple pipe, what we call purple pipe in the industry, and public access reuse, which we call it in Florida, where you take wastewater that's treated to a high standard and put it into lawn irrigation. And it's a separate system, completely separate than the drinking water system. So that every gallon you use of reclaimed water or reuse water, that's a gallon you don't use of drinking water. Why put drinking water on lawns and other things? Now, advanced to today, and we have multiple states doing potable reuse, where they take that same water product and they purify that water product to be able to drink it. And we just gave an award to the largest largest potable reuse project in the world that's in operation today, and it operates at 130 million gallons a day in California. So it is the drinking water source for millions of people in California. And they're on their way. Another county is on its way to build another plant bigger than that. So those are just two large scale, but there are many other projects, including a project in El Paso, Texas, where they're having droughts and issues with supplying their population. So they're turning to potable reuse.
Yes, it's definitely the conversations are happening. I think the education is getting to be more strategic and targeted, this conference, for example. Pat, what are your thoughts?
Well, similar to Bart, just looking at how water recycling has evolved over the last 30, 40, 50 years from a source of water for irrigation and non-potable uses, cooling, manufacturing processes, that kind of thing, to drinking, to now, Bart mentioned the 130 MGD plant in California. Over the next 2 years, we expect El Paso to open its direct potable reuse plant and supply 10 MGD of direct potable recycled drinking water. So that's exciting, and I think as we move through the next 10 years, you're going to see more projects in states where, on the one hand, you think they have a lot of water, but on the other hand, they're facing a lot of challenges and view reuse as a way of augmenting and developing those certain reliable supplies that that they need to grow industry and other types of sectors. So that's exciting.
For your listeners, I'd like to define what she just said, in that in the progress from non-potable source or reclaimed water for irrigation, we've moved to potable in an indirect way and a direct way. The indirect uses recharge through river systems, lakes, water bodies, and aquifers, where the water is transmitted, blended, and then pulled back out on another end at some distance, and then it is treated again and goes to the customers. Whereas direct is absolutely what it means, and that is, it's when it's treated, it doesn't go to in nature, it goes directly into the blended with the existing sources, which is typically on average 5% addition or 10% addition to the waters already provided to a customer base out of a utility. So bottom line is, it's directly blended into the source rather than going through this other route. Most people that watch the indirect and are customers of it usually say, why are you going indirect? Why don't you just, if you're purifying it, why don't you just put it into our system? So that's where we're seeing communities understand potable reuse and embrace, let's cut, because it's more costly. It can be more costly to do the secondary environmental step. So why not just give it to us straight? And that's what's happening.
That makes sense. I know when I worked at a utility a while back, we had a membrane facility, and our board members were so confident in the cleanliness of the water that left the facility that they drank it at a board meeting. And it was, you see today, you go onto LinkedIn, you go onto any of our sites where there are conversations happening around anything environmental, and reuse is a topic that comes up again and again. And I think I've seen just over the past couple of weeks, so many states that, as you mentioned, maybe don't have water scarcity issues at this time, but they're planning for the future and they're recognizing the value of water reuse. My next question is going to get a little more about you and yourself in the industry. So I always love to ask, what is it that brought you into the field of not just the water industry, but specifically water reuse? Where is your passion and where did that start?
Well, for me, it started, I was a hydrogeologist, or I was a geologist. My career started in the oil field. And when I was educated in Texas A&M, I learned not only about oil, petrology, but also the water systems. And so when I took the courses on water, I was intrigued and always found that fascinating. And I thought I'd want to go back to it. Sure enough, when the economy of oil goes up and down, water is pretty steady. Everybody always needs water. So I ended up moving from Texas back to Florida, and I ended up going back to school, advancing my degree to do modeling, and then I ended up creating projects and working for the state utilities, as I do now, to advance water purification, water projects that are sustainable and economically feasible for the future. And this is the industry, the water reuse industry is that. It's the future.
It is. And I'm glad that you mentioned the economic portion of it, because a lot of utilities maybe steer away from water reuse as a future option because they're concerned about the cost, but there are ways to do it economically. And I think, I would encourage any utility that is interested, to reach out, interested in that particular topic, to reach out to your organization to get guidance and education on how it could be a potential option for them. Pat, what about you?
Well, I became interested in water after I left the Clinton administration. I worked with the Rural Community Assistance Programs. I was their lobbyist in DC, and those programs provide technical assistance to small communities, rural communities, for their water and wastewater. needs. And I just became fascinated. I've always been fascinated in sustainable development, how communities develop in a sustainable way. And as I began to work with this organization, I just saw the need and the importance of water and water infrastructure to how communities develop and meet the needs of their residents, not only on the quality of life side and the water side, but really on their economic viability. Without water, these communities don't survive and don't grow. So from there, my interest just grew, and I worked with the Water Environment Federation as their lobbyist, and then the National Association of Clean Water Agencies as their lobbyist, and the policy features of water have always been interesting to me, and it just naturally gravitated to resource recovery and water recycling and reuse. So
that's a great lead in to my next question for you, Pat. I've heard you say that water is the fuel for the new economy.
yes.
Can you elaborate on that slightly?
Well, it is, and you see it everywhere. I thought about that as I read an article about how the aviation industry is moving toward cleaner fuel, and cleaner fuel is biofuel, fuels that use soybean to produce the oil that they fly on. Well, that requires a lot of water. And, so if you look at the future of certainly our fuel for aviation, if you look at the future of renewable energy supplies, it requires water. You realize that water is going to power the next several decades. Data centers, chip manufacturers, companies that develop a reliable source of water will be companies that can succeed. And so water, I think, is going to fuel our economic future.
Such a great, strong statement. I know that being just in the industry for a while, when I was at the utility, we worked with some organizations on their water reuse master plans, and the amount of water that is consumed, which is growing daily, right? You mentioned data centers, but the amount of water that's consumed at different facilities or golf courses, and they're using, in many cases,
potable
drinking
water quality. Yeah,
it could be. There's such an opportunity here to have a paradigm shift where we're only drinking the drinking water, and then we also have our, direct reuse to where we can also drink that water.
And companies like Hach know this very well. Technologies have advanced to the point where we can take just about any source of water, no matter how dirty it is, and clean it to any level of cleanliness you need, any water quality you need for just about any application you need it for, and at any scale. So whether you're talking about drinking water at your tap, at your kitchen sink, an RO system for that, or an RO system or a larger filtration, another type of technology for 130 MGD facility that supplies drinking water to millions of Californians, you can do it all with the technology that's on the market. Hach is part of that work that's being done. I think it's an exciting future.
You mentioned technology, and so Bart, I'm going to ask you, do you see any exciting technologies on the horizon? Again, we're thinking future, that you want to talk about or are excited about seeing, or is there, even if it doesn't exist, is there something that we would like to see in the future that would maybe help to continue to build that landscape of water reuse and the education to support it and the tools to really make it more executable?
Well, we have all the tools, and like as Pat said, Hach knows as well that all the purification tools, all the filtration tools are there. They'll only get better and more sustainable and more efficient. We've seen in the last 10 years great advancements in membranes, where before it would take a membrane 1200 psi pressure to pounds per square inch to push water through a membrane for reverse osmosis. Now we're seeing on the order of 400 and 200 pounds per square inch. So that reduces the energy that needs to go into it. So I'd say as much as I'd look for new technologies, I'd look for energy technologies that are more sustainable to drive these forces in these projects. I also go back that people have a misconception about water, and water's dirty. The H2O molecule is not dirty, never is dirty. The H2O molecule is what it is, and things attach itself to it. So it's basically the stripping off of these other components, chemistry, whatever, that's on the water molecule is what we do. The water molecule itself is never polluted.
It's a great explanation, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And it's easy for people to understand. If you're not in the industry, and especially if you're not familiar with water reuse, it does tend to maybe be slightly confusing. It's hard to imagine that you can take something, as you said, as dirty as it can be, and then make it to basically bring it up to drinking water standards. So it's a great, I think, topic of discussion, and something that we're going to continue to hear about. And I love the fact that we're kind of pulling back the curtain and really talking about it now.
So we have a saying that was created in the Water Reuse Association because of exactly what you're talking about. And it's, don't judge water by its history, where it's been, judge water by its quality. You can see its quality before, you can see its quality afterwards. Every bit of water on the earth has passed through some animal, some plant, something, and it's been dirty at some time. So all water's been reused, and all water is reuse water, whether it comes from your river or comes from a groundwater source.
And recycling is just really accelerating that process.
So, Pat, you talked about policies and regulations and how you have worked in that area for quite some time. How do you see that impacting the development and adoption of water reuse practices, and what changes to that do you see in the future?
Well, our water management system in the U.S. has really grown up around two primary federal statutes. The Clean Water Act that regulates discharges from point sources, discharges of water from point sources into the waters of the U.S. The second federal statute is the Safe Drinking Water Act that regulates what we drink. So the Clean Water Act regulates what is being put into surface waters that we draw on in many cases for drinking purposes or other types of water needs, and the Safe Drinking Water Act governs what we drink. Water recycling doesn't neatly fit into the Clean Water Act, and of course if you're recycling for potable purposes, you have to comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act, which we do. So between those two federal statutes, which are really the guardrails for the work that we're doing, the states really have a very active role in overseeing how recycled water is produced and managed, and what it's managed for. And so there are 51 states plus the District of Columbia, and they all have their own rules. And so the challenge that we're facing and trying to address is how can we help identify consistencies across those 50 states? How can we help develop policy efficiencies that allow companies that may operate interstate to ascribe to a set of regulations that are consistent. So that's the challenge in front of us. Every state does it a little differently. Every state asks you to abide by certain requirements a little differently from each other. And if we can somehow provide a way of achieving more consensus, streamline some of those processes, identify consistencies and uniformities, then I think that would help a lot.
Yeah.
So.
It's like when you have, a classroom and all the kids are chatting about their own different topics. You're trying to get everybody to kind of come together and talk about this topic, but everyone has their own kind of track that they're going. It's difficult. It's difficult to get their attention. Question about, because we've chatted about it earlier, the community. And I know that WateReuse works a lot with education and communities. So I'd love to hear some examples, Bart, of how you're doing that, how you're engaging with communities to foster a better understanding of the value of reuse water.
So public education is one of our strongest suits for the Water Reuse Association. It's one of our biggest goals is education outreach. And we have multiple avenues for that. I'll talk about, first, to understand how to speak to people about it, because typically I'm not the person you want in front of a town council or maybe just the public to tell them how I think polar reuse is wonderful. And it's because I have a stake in it. They don't trust me as much. They know I have something to gain from it. So who do they trust? And we did a survey in California, a multiple day survey, and found that the most trusted people to speak about it are the doctors, medicine. And then it goes from your doctor down to universities and maybe the School of Public Health. And so so that layers down to your engineers and your people who are experts. So we actually have worked with and continue to work with groups of doctors to educate them, because if you think about it, every time you've gone to the doctor, they tell you what's wrong with your body or how great you're doing, but they never talk about water. Yet that 70% at least, if not 75% of your body is water. And why don't they speak about that? Why don't they tell you that you need to be drinking cleaner water or something else? So it's an interesting give and take from the medical community to educate them on water, educate them on what we do with water, how safe and actually healthy our water is compared to other sources. And the bottom fact is, as I mentioned earlier, that don't judge water on its history, judge on the quality. When you go to potable reuse water, it has to be the cleanest water ever. And why is that? Because people do know the history, and we publish what was in the water, and we also publish what we took out, what's not in the water. So all of that was in the water that you didn't want to drink is out. And what we say is potable reuse has to be the cleanest water ever, because you know all that. So to gain our trust, to gain their trust, we have to show them everything. And that includes having the medical community help us with that message, because there are people that will go to their doctor and say, hey, I see this polar reuse thing, would you drink it? And if they say yes, absolutely, and they're educated on it and they talk about it with the education that they have that we give them, then it's a win-win.
I like the fact that you said it's an open book, and it's highly regulated. So it is the safest. I mean, there are bottled waters out there that, if you look at how it's regulated, it's very little. Yeah. Pat, any additions to the community?
Well, I think Bart nailed it pretty much. It's about finding those leaders in the community, trusted messengers, and having them speak to ratepayers. And certainly the medical community is a very important key stakeholder and an important messenger for us. So I think developing communication tools and programs. And the other thing that I think that is important is when consumers, ratepayers come into our facilities and actually get to see the technology that is used in cleaning the water, that goes a really long way. They're blown away. Anyone who's ever visited a wastewater treatment plant or a water treatment plant is blown away by the engineering marvel these plants are. And so I think that's an important piece, is just bringing the community and bringing community leaders into these facilities to look at the technologies, the processes, and just become more comfortable with recycling.
I'll just add on to what you said about wastewater plants. What is the most ingenious invention of modern time that runs 24/7, 365, and never breaks down? It's a wastewater plant. It allows us to do what we do, to live in cities instead of rural areas, and it advances technology, advances education, advances everything. So it's a marvel, but nobody talks about it. But when they go see it, as Pat said, they're astounded by the technology there that's right under their nose that allows them to use the facilities in their own home, whether drinking water plants or wastewater plants. It opens up a new world for most people.
And as we talked about earlier, it's really pulling the curtain back. You have these unsung heroes in the water industry that have been behind the scenes for so many years because it wasn't something that was really talked about. And now we've kind of turned a corner and people are beginning to talk about it. The tours, one time I had an individual that was upset about the price of wastewater treatment. So we brought him in, gave him a tour of the facility, and at the end of the tour, he said, "I am shocked, number one, that you don't charge more because it's such an amazing process. The biological side of it, the technologies that are there." And that was probably 15 years ago, and it's just advanced time after time. Every day you see something new that is either being looked at or being implemented when it comes to water. The last question today, and then I'll see if you guys want to add anything else, is really going to be for our audience. I want you to say, if you were going to talk to someone who maybe doesn't have as much background or expertise in water reuse, what piece of advice would you give them to prepare for what's coming? Because we know that with water scarcity, water reuse is going to become even more of a common term. So what's a piece of advice that you would give them? Would it be to, visit, your local utility and ask questions or do research? What would each of your pieces of advice be? Bart, I'll start with you.
Well, first I'd go back to the fact that we all need water. We're made up of 70% of the water. And most people understand about many different things about their body, whether they've had illnesses, they understand different muscle structures, maybe they're bodybuilders. People know all kinds of great things, but they leave out water. And water's the one thing, if you don't have it for 3 days, you die. And it's so important, yet unfortunately, we found that over the last 50 years, we've maybe done too good a job. Our forefathers that built these systems that run 265 or 24/7, 365, how many people think about water when they get up in the morning and turn the tap? How many think, I wonder if there's going to be water there, let alone the water is safe and usable and drinkable? Most countries don't have that luxury. And we've had that luxury for so long. It's an expected thing, and it's so cheap that people really don't want to pay attention or don't have an interest in looking into or understanding water because they can pay it. It's pennies. It's the least amount of any utility or anything they pay monthly. So they don't want to be bothered. They're busy. But unfortunately, they're overlooking one of the most important things in their life is consuming water and where they should get the water. What is safe water? What is the best water? All those things. And now, unfortunately, we're advancing technology to the point where we're reusing water without a lot of public understanding just natural water resources. So that's where, as you mentioned earlier, the communication piece comes in to need to take them from a lack of education of just general water supply, water resources, natural water resources, where they are on a pollution spectrum, because all water, groundwater or anything, has some type of contamination. It just does. Maybe on microscopic level, but it has it. So we're cleaning it up and we're making it clean and purifying it for the public. So I'd say understand water for your own body, for your own life, and its longevity.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Water is kind of like out of sight, out of mind, because you don't see the infrastructure and you don't see the work that goes on behind the scenes to make it clean until it's not there anymore.
So here's an example for a utility and local community. You see libraries with the names of local politicians on them, right? You see many other buildings and community centers and the same. How often do you see a wastewater treatment plant with the name of a policymaker on it? You don't. And the infrastructure is out of sight, out of mind. In Hillsborough County, we have over 6,000 miles of pipe underground that we operate daily, 24/7. Denver, probably as much or more, maybe 8,000 miles of pipe. Out of sight, out of mind. But it has to work 365. 24/7.
Because you don't want to imagine, and I think that's the question that I always like to put in people's minds. What would happen if you tried to turn your water on and it wasn't there? Right. Like, just begin to kind of think of that. You think of all the things you can't do, the simple things that you take for granted on a daily basis. And it's a scary thought.
That's not when you want to get educated on water.
No. Pat?
Well, I would just get back to the comment Bart made, don't judge water from its history, judge it by its quality. And just keep in mind that there's always been a limited amount of fresh water that's usable and drinkable on the planet. And we want to make sure that it lasts and that we continue to have plentiful water resources into the future. So that would be my message. And we should take advantage of technology that enables us to develop that insurance policy.
Yeah, exactly. I like to say that water is the lifeblood of our communities because it is what kind of keeps everything going. And if we didn't have organizations like WateReuse and companies like Hach that have a focus on ensuring the future sustainability of our water resources, then what would we have? And that's a scary thought.
You can go back to the circular economy discussion and water, the circular water economy, and everything you wear on your body, everything you consume, use, even your cars, everything has a water impact. And you can look on Google, you can look anywhere on the internet and find the water it takes to grow a crop, the water it takes to build a car, the water it takes to make these clothes, the water it takes to make anything. So that's another education piece people need to understand.
It's a very important topic. You can actually, there's a website that you can go on. It's your own water footprint, and you can fill out a couple of questions, and then you can see what your individual water footprint in a single day is. And if you use a cell phone, there's all these things that go into it. But that number is astonishing, and if you multiply that by the number of people on this planet, we have to move in this direction. We don't have a choice.
And I'd even take it from products to even the keyboard. And every AI search, every AI command that people put in is 34 to 100 gallons of water. They don't understand that it takes water to cool the processors for all these computers to work. And that's reuse water. It's a big industry, and it's a big part of WateReuse itself in our association. But even working on your computer, even talking on your cell phone, there's a water imprint.
Absolutely. Well, do either of you have anything else to add today, or?
I think you did a great job covering all the key points, so thank you very much.
I'd just say anybody that wants to look into it more, wants to understand water reuse, look up our association. Pat's in Washington, D.C. and Alexandria, and we're throughout the country. And we have an imprint also across the world. So join us.
Well, thank you, Bart. Thank you, Pat, for joining us today.
Thank you, Stacy.
And to check out our podcast, you can look at any of your podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, and on YouTube. Thank you both very much, and go enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.